Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for prioritizing H.R. 1. I also want to thank Ms. Gupta, Ms. Eiffel, Mr. Nadi, and Ms. Tuberville for your testimony and for being extraordinary patriots in helping to protect our democracy. The landmark legislation that we're considering this afternoon will do what Democrats said we would do by reducing the influence of corporate spending in political campaigns, restoring ethics and integrity to government, and restoring power to the American people. Widespread cynicism in America is caused by a deep sense that the government doesn't work for the people, caused by policies that amplify the voices of the rich and powerful to drown out the voices of ordinary Americans and making it harder and harder for people to vote. Here in America, our great democracy will only survive if power resides with the people and not the powerful corporate special interests. The first step we must take is to make sure that every American has an equal voice in their government, so that government enacts policy that advance the public good. Instead, too many Americans are getting crushed by healthcare costs, childcare expenses, housing costs, low wages, and ballooning student loan debt. They've watched Congress and this administration rig the rules for the wealthy and the well-connected, while refusing to address the issues that really matter in their lives. We've also seen the voting process become an obstacle course, with ever-increasing burdens, particularly on eligible African Americans and other communities of color, and on young and low-income voters. These problems have only been made worse by the presence of dark money in our elections, which means anyone can secretly impact our elections, including even the prospect of foreign adversaries. And that's why it's so important that we pass H.R. 1, which will repair our democracy by restoring real power to the people of this country and away from the special interests and powerful corporations. I'm very proud that the legislation includes the Disclose Act, which would require that we shed light on very corrosive dark money in our elections, that it provides for automatic voter registration, which I've introduced, and finally that it includes legislation to give the Justice Department more authority to better enforce the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Without fixing our broken system and taking power from the powerful special interests and returning it to the people of this country, it will be almost impossible to make progress on the issues that are important to the American people, like higher wages, lower prescription drug costs, reducing gun violence, and responding to the urgent challenges of climate change. Last Congress, we saw what happens when politicians respond to their donors and powerful corporations. Republicans voted to take away health care for 23 million Americans and raise out-of-pocket costs for millions. They gave billions of dollars in tax breaks to the rich so that billionaires could avoid paying their fair share, and then proposed paying for those tax breaks by cutting Medicaid and Social Security. And they passed legislation to please the NRA and ease firearm restrictions, even after many of the deadliest mass shootings in modern American history. So this bill will return power to the people and restore our democracy. It will help us clean up the culture of corruption in Washington and focus on making sure our government works for the people of this country. Republican opposition to these reforms, as seen by the almost farcical arguments that we heard during this hearing, is obvious, because they benefit from this broken system, as do their donors and their super PACs. And so I want to associate myself with the remarks of Congresswoman Bass about the very disappointing positions of two of our witnesses that are frankly arguing to disenfranchise Americans from participating in their elections by misstating evidence and exaggerating, claiming claims are being exaggerated. But I'd like to just ask you, Mr. Nadi, you in your written testimony addressed the real pernicious impact of Citizens United, that from 2008 to 2016, these well-funded outside groups spent over $5 billion, and there was an increase in special interest spending of 900%. That decision of Citizens United that invited the corporate takeover of our democracy, which many are celebrating apparently at this hearing, was premised on two assumptions in Citizens United. One, that new campaign finance system would be developed that pairs corporate spending with effective disclosure, and two, that unlimited corporate spending would pose no threat of corruption because these would be independent expenditures. Would you describe how those two assumptions have actually panned out in the complete loss of control of our democracy by the American people and the complete hijacking of American democracy by big corporate special interests?
Yes, Congressman, those premises weren't true when they were written, and they're not true now. They're considerably less true now than they were then. As to disclosure, the inherent characteristics of the corporate form make it very easy for individuals and entities to route money through corporations ultimately to super PACs or other outside spenders, and thereby to cloak the ultimate source of the funds. So that premise of Citizens United has not played out. And to be clear, that's mostly the fault of the Federal Election Commission, who could have stepped in and stopped this and has chosen repeatedly not to. As to independence, again, the Federal Election Commission has done nothing to ensure that this new category of outside corporate spending is in fact independent. And every election cycle, the sham of independence gets shammier, and there's more and more coordination between the so-called outside spenders and the candidates, contrary to law.
And why does that matter?
Because the premise of Citizens United, even if you take it at its face, is that independent spending does not corrupt, but direct contributions are corrupting. But a coordinated outside expenditure is equivalent to a direct contribution. So even if it's true that outside spending isn't corrupting, and it's not true, but even if it were, within the framework of Citizens United, this should still be unlawful, and there is no First Amendment right to corrupt.
Thank you. I go back, Mr. Chairman.